This is Dr. Hamilton. Welcome to my video series on William Shakespeare's Much Ado About Nothing. In this video, I'd like to discuss the war imagery. We've said that a war actually frames this play, even though it takes place in Messina, a town in Sicily, which is known for beautiful scenery and is a place of peace. The male characters, the central characters, begin by coming back from a war to Messina, and the camaraderie that they develop between one another, the bonds that they form while they're at war, become a way that they measure all their relationships after that. And so when they go into this new context of Messina, which is a peaceful context, they still bring those bonds with them. And so as they enter Messina and they enter this place of peace, the play will ironically draw on this ancient analogy between love and war. So they're going to Messina and they're seeking romance, really, after a hard-fought war. But what they find, ironically, is this new war that they didn't expect. They think that they've left the war behind, but they meet up with a more even formidable war. So war imagery in Much Ado draws on themes of enemy, imagery of the enemy, surrender, torture, and most significantly, treachery and betrayal. So since treachery is such a key theme, it also connects to imagery of religious heresy and the imagery of bestialization, the metamorphosis of people into animals. So some of the same sense of religious heresy, of crossing over to a religion that is not your own, becoming an apostate. This was regarded as a crime, or it could be a crime for which people could be punished, even burned during Shakespeare's lifetime. So religious heresy was quite serious. And the imagery of bestialization, people foregoing their reason and becoming animals, and so betraying themselves, losing control. So in the context of this, love, in the context of war, love becomes kind of what Benedict would call a turncoat. So love is a traitor. A turncoat is literally somebody who changes to the other team, right? If you're red, you become blue, or if you're blue, you become red. You change your coat. And so against the solid, predictable allegiance of comrades, love is mercurial, unpredictable, untrustworthy. It causes people fundamentally to switch allegiance for no apparent reason. And this is what deeply troubles Benedict, as we'll find out later. And it becomes an immense threat to the relationships that he values the most with his friends. So, like I said, the great defender of the exponent of male camaraderie is Benedict, who claims that he refuses to love women because he does not believe that they are faithful. He says in Act 1, Scene 1, line 227, "Because I will not do them the wrong to mistrust any, I will do myself the right to trust none." So in other words, he's saying, if I marry a woman, I will be mistrustful all the time. And so I won't do her the wrong, so I won't trust any, and I will remain a bachelor. So we will talk about, when we speak about Benedict in more detail, we'll explore in more detail the way that he, as a misogynist, he believes that all women sort of will turn men into cuckolds. They will all cheat on men. But he does this from kind of a philosophical point of view. And the philosophical point of view is that because Love is a passion. It is mercurial. It causes people to change allegiance, and he forms his view of relationships as these soldierly relationships between men in battle. Um, he he regards love as being mercurial and unpredictable and leading to betrayal, and so leading to unpredictable behavior. And so he really seems to suggest that love in its essence is constituted by betrayal. So when Claudio in Act 1, Scene 1, explains his intent to turn husband, quote unquote, intent to turn husband, Benedict regards this as a betrayal. That word turn, remember the word turncoat I just mentioned, it suggests betrayal. It suggests that Claudio's entering a realm that is mercurial, that's going to cause him to be untrustworthy, to be unpredictable, to change his allegiance. And although Benedict is not serious in the sense that he's calling like Claudio a traitor or anything, he is serious in the sense that he thinks this is something about love that is fundamentally untrustworthy and that Claudio has sort of given himself over to this. So we know that Benedict is still brooding over this, over what he perceives as Claudio's betrayal, when in his very first soliloquy in Act 2, Scene 3, he cries out in bewilderment of Claudio. Claudio was wont to speak plain to the purpose, like an honest man and a soldier. And now is he turned orthography. His words are a very fantastical banquet, just so many strange dishes. May I be so converted and see with these eyes? I cannot tell. You see, Claudio used to be plain to the purpose, honest, a soldier, predictable, and now his words are a fantastical banquet with all these strange dishes. Somehow it seems ornate, florid, false, phony. And then he asks himself, may I be so converted and see with those eyes? And you see here how the religious imagery is infiltrating the war imagery. And so the horror of conversion, to, inadvertently, you're with the Orthodox religion, and then somehow you have an experience, and against your will, you're converted and see with new eyes. But if you are converted, then you are moving to an unorthodox belief, and you could be burned at the stake as a heretic. And in fact, Benedict uses imagery very like that a little bit later. But Claudio has now become suspect, dishonest, potentially evasive, his language full of pretension. And in other words, love may be in its very essence untrustworthy, mercurial. Shakespeare has another character in his play The Two Gentlemen of Verona that he actually names Proteus, and Proteus is a god of the sea who is associated with the constant change of water, and this is a romantic character who's constantly falling in love and changing from one woman to another. And there's a sort of horror about this idea that you could be you define yourself as an honest, trustworthy, reliable, predictable person, but then somehow love could convert you to something else. You could change to something else tomorrow, and in war, that is becoming a traitor. That's becoming that's betraying your cause. That's betraying your country, betraying your comrades. And indeed, we see that there are three different examples of male betrayal in the play, and two of those are because of love. Okay, so you've got Claudio, who decides to turn husband when he marries Hero, the mildest form of betrayal, right? But he does. He turns husband. Um, and Benedict sort of experiences that as a betrayal. Benedict, when he falls in love with Beatrice, though, it's much a bigger form of betrayal, because Beatrice, in the heat of her fury at Claudio for denouncing Hero on her wedding day, tells Benedict essentially to choose between her love or Claudio, and she tells him that you need to kill your best friend. So Benedict is forced to betray his best friend for his love. So Benedict changes sides. He becomes a turncoat. He actually challenges Claudio to a duel. So the power of love to cause people to change sides is very explicit in the poem, and so I want you to see how far this war imagery go. This imagery of love turning you into a turncoat, into a traitor. Ironically, though, the real traitor, the play's biggest traitor, is of course not Beatrice. Beatrice happens to be right about Claudio. She's right about Hero, that Hero has been faithful. And actually, it is the male comrade, Don John, who is the one who has betrayed. And Don John, ironically, in a play that calls love into question and seems to be very skeptical of the idea of love, is love really a traitor? Does love cause us to betray our friends? Does love cause us to betray ourselves? In this play, Don John is the traitor. He betrays his own brother, and he doesn't do it. And he betrays Claudio. He doesn't do it for love at all. He does not do it for love at all. It is rivalry. It is, in fact, the rivalry that you get among men in this case. Rivalry with his brother, Don Pedro, and his desire to hurt him, and Claudio through him. Claudio will get all the glory of his overthrow. And so what we have then is this, this sense of male camaraderie among soldiers that is established as a test of all loyalty, right? And everything virtuous about friendship and about bonds. And love is seen as an apostate to this, a heretic that should be burned at the stake, a turncoat, right? And yet, it's Don John it's the man that actually is the source of treachery in the play. It's not love. And in fact, as we'll see, love actually in its authentic form in Benedict creates the opportunity for deeper insight and growth. So I want you to see how far this idea of love as potential betrayal is developed. It's developed in the very smallest details of the play. So in Act 1, Scene 1, Claudio confesses his love of Hero to Benedict, and they go off to a side, and of course that's when Benedict mocks Hero and mocks Claudio's love of Hero. So they're off lingering. Meanwhile, Don Pedro and his officers have gone up to Leonato's house. Don Pedro returns looking for them, and when he finally spots them, Claudio and Benedict standing off alone together, he sort of plays around with them, and he implies that Benedict and Claudio have been plotting some secret treachery over there. It's a very playful scene, but once again, the idea of treachery comes in here. So Don Pedro says, "What secret hath you here that you followed not to Leonato's?" And Benedict responds, "I would your grace would constrain me to tell, to force me to tell." And so Don Pedro playing along here, "I charge thee on thy allegiance." Now he's evoking his allegiance, his loyalty. Um, Even in this playful little scene here, you hear Count Claudio. I can. Benedict says, "I can be as secret as a dumb man. I would have you think so, but on my allegiance, mark you this: on my allegiance, he is in love." So you have this sort of cartoonish image here, that Benedict is being called by his commanding officer on his allegiance. He's saying, "You've sworn a military oath, to report treachery, to report the secret that they have had." And then, of course, the joke is that it's just that Claudio's in love, which isn't, it's it's obviously not a government secret. It's a personal thing, and so that's the joke. But this small detail, though, reminds us that this specific form of allegiance that exists among Claudio, Don Pedro, Benedict, and Don John is very powerful indeed. And so you just have this kind of cartoonish rehearsal that reminds you of the real allegiance that exists and of the context of war, where this could be a very, very serious thing. Don Pedro is Benedict and Claudio's commanding officer, and this is a scene like you might see in a war if something serious took place, if there was real treachery. But the imagery, of course, continues. It's so pervasive throughout the play. Later in the night, so when Don Pedro, later in the scene, when Don Pedro agrees to court Hero on behalf of Claudio at the party, the reveling, what he does is he evokes imagery that suggests capturing an enemy. "I will unclasp my heart and take her hearing prisoner with the force and strong encounter of my amorous tale." Take her hearing prisoner. Again, imagery of enemy, taking somebody prisoner, the force and strong encounter. So that's, again, love as war. So as we've discussed before, Beatrice establishes herself as this sort of primary lightning rod figure representing sort of all women, and so she ends up being the galvanizer, the person around whom this war imagery clusters. It seems to be transferred onto her because she's the most loud, and loud is probably not the right word, but she's the most witty and talkative. This war imagery gets transferred onto Beatrice. She becomes sort of the symbol, playfully, of all that is supposed to be mercurial, and all that is supposed to be, warlike about women. So Benedict, of course, in Act 2, Scene 1, he complains that "I stood like a man at a mark with a whole army shooting at me. She speaks poignards and every word stabs." So a mark is like a target, and so he imagines Beatrice as being armed and shooting at him like a target. Poignards are daggers and stabbing him with every word. So she represents then the kind of the ability that women have to sort of eviscerate men with words. And of course, we know that Beatrice and Benedict are described as being in a merry war. So once again, that oxymoron, merry war, an exuberant, zest-filled kind of war, but a war nonetheless. And so they kind of represent the war between the sexes. Hero says, continuing this imagery associated with Beatrice, Hero says when she criticizes her and Beatrice overhears Hero criticizing her with these other women um, about her pride in Act 3, Scene 1. Hero says of Beatrice, she would laugh me out of myself, she would mock me into air, press me to death with wit, die with mocks. I would die with mocks, which is as bad as die with tickling. So, pressing to death is a form of torture in which heavy weights are loaded onto criminals who refuse to plead. Her mockery is depicted as a form of execution through tickling. So, this is really interesting. Again, Beatrice as the symbol of war. He says that she's the goddess Ate in good apparel. I think the goddess Ate was the goddess of chaos, who was straight from hell, and so she brings, this. She's sort of armed for battle, but sort of as the symbol of war. The irony, though, is that Beatrice is often this lone voice against a cemented male authority. And so, the idea that the war is really with her, that the forces, that she really is the one that is the army shooting, is a little bit of a stretch here. The power, the male power, is assumed and invisible. And, Beatrice is a very definitely visible form of resistance to that power, a witty presence who's unforgettable. But I think that the idea that, all of the war imagery gets transferred onto Beatrice is a little bit unfair. So when eventually Benedict resolves to be horribly in love with Beatrice after he's easily deceived by his friends into believing that Beatrice is in love with him, he has this vision that his friends are going to ridicule him, of the derision and the jokes that will be made about him. And he says, shall quips and sentences and these paper bullets of the brain awe a man from the career of his humor? Paper bullets of the brain. And what he means by that is jokes written about him, witty put downs, and things like that. But that phrase, paper bullets of the brain, of course, reminds us of Beatrice. A whole army shooting at me. She speaks poignards, and every word stabs. The merry war. And his accommodation to this hail of bullets, we might imagine, is his coming to realize also that maybe this war, this merry war, is more merry than it is a war, that it's more merry than it is sad, and that it's not really as bad as he has made it out to be. So you can see through this war imagery, you can see him coming to terms with his relationship with Beatrice. Yes, it's full of fights and things like that, but it's not so bad after all. And when we finally see Benedict declare his love for Beatrice, is this really moving line. I do love nothing in the world as well as you. This is Act 4, Scene 2. Is that not strange? I do love nothing in the world as well as you. Is that not strange? So we might appreciate knowing about Benedict and knowing how the war imagery develops for him and how important it is, how afraid he is of apostasy, afraid of being a turncoat, turning to the other side, that when he's really converted, when he's really changed, that he's as shocked as we are. Is that not strange? I do love nothing in the world as well as you. Is that not strange? And so you can really feel the weight of that as he changes allegiance. And of course, the one thing that Beatrice asks of him immediately is precisely what he's feared. On line 287, Act 4, Scene 2, kill Claudio, right? And then when he becomes engaged, which is means that he is committing to do it, it is a sort of happy coincidence that that word later on became to be committed in a marriage. So his engagement is killing Claudio, we might say. He's chosen to betray his best friend. And so, what's interesting is that whereas Claudio's love for Hero makes him a dupe to Don John, makes him easy to manipulate, Benedict's love of the right person actually leads him to detect something false in those male relationships that he betrays instinctively. And he acts instinctively, but it is not to a disaster, it is to a deeper fidelity with the truth. And what Benedict gets from love is a deeper kind of clarity, a deeper kind of understanding. It places him actually on the side of the truth, even if he's not on Claudio's side temporarily. And so I think more than anything, the love imagery evokes a change of allegiance. The war imagery evokes a change of allegiance, and the play, I think, very courageously raises this question: is love itself, if it derives from this change of allegiance, if it makes people mercurial, unpredictable, if it makes them, switch sides so quickly, then does it only lead to nothing but betrayal, dishonesty, and inconstancy? Something the Elizabethans were terrified of, and I think that we are too. As I've argued here, I think that Benedict's plot suggests that the right kind of love can actually lead to a form of clarity. However, we see Claudio go very, very wrong. Is there something intrinsically wrong with Claudio, that he's not given the sort of gift of the clarity that Benedict gets? He doesn't have the instincts that Benedict has. So how do you tell the difference between true and false love? How do you tell the difference between a true and a false person? If there is such a thing as a clarity that love can bestow. So how do you look underneath the surface to see the truth that lies hidden? That is what we will discuss next. All right. Thank you very much, and hope you enjoyed this lesson, and look forward to seeing you in the next lesson. Okay, take care.